The Syrian Betrayal, a Heiress who fell in love with a killer. 1964, The Golden Cage. The year was 1964, and Manhattan's Upper East Side gleamed with the promise of prosperity despite the lingering shadows of the Great Depression. In the towering penthouse of the Ashford building, 23-year-old Victoria Ashford stood before floor-ceiling windows, watching the city sprawl beneath her like a kingdom she could never truly rule. Victoria possessed the kind of beauty that graced magazine covers, platinum blonde hair that caught light like spun gold, emerald eyes that held depths of intelligence her father preferred to ignore, and a figure that made even the most conservative evening gowns appear scandalous. She was the sole heir to the Ashford Steel fortune, a company that had built half of New York's skyline and filled the family coffers with more money than 3 generations could spend. Yet for all her wealth and privilege, Victoria felt like a prisoner in her gilded cage. "Victoria, darling, you simply must come away from that window," her mother, Eleanor Ashford, called from across the opulent living room. Eleanor was a woman who had perfected the art of appearing delicate while wielding iron control over her household. "Your father has important news to share," says Ashford, a man whose presence commanded respect in boardrooms across the nation, cleared his throat as Victoria reluctantly joined her parents. His steel-gray hair was perfectly groomed, his 3-piece suit immaculate, and his expression carried the weight of decisions that affected thousands of lives. "Victoria," he began, his voice carrying the authority that had built an empire, "I've had extensive discussions with the Pemberton family. Their son, William, has expressed serious interest in courting you." Victoria's heart sank. William Pemberton III was everything her parents desired in a son-in-law: wealthy, well-connected, and utterly boring. She had met him at several society functions, and each encounter had left her feeling more suffocated than the last. "Father, the Pembertons own the largest shipping company on the East Coast," Charles continued, ignoring her attempt to speak. "A union between our families would create the most powerful industrial alliance in the country. Think of the legacy, Victoria. Think of the empire we could build together." Eleanor nodded approvingly, her perfectly manicured hands folded in her lap. "William is a fine young man from an excellent family. You could do far worse, darling." Victoria felt the familiar weight of expectation pressing down upon her shoulders. Since childhood, every aspect of her life had been carefully orchestrated: her education at the finest private schools, her debut into society. Even her friendships had been selected based on their potential benefit to the family name. "You need time to consider this," Victoria said finally, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her chest. Charles' expression hardened slightly. "Time is a luxury we don't have, Victoria. The business world moves quickly, and opportunities like this don't wait for indecision. I expect a non-answer by the end of the week." That evening, Victoria found herself alone in her private study, surrounded by first-edition novels and leather-bound journals that represented her only escape from the suffocating expectations of her world. She had always been an avid reader, drawn to stories of adventure and passion that seemed impossibly distant from her own carefully controlled existence. As she gazed out at the city lights twinkling below, Victoria made a decision that would change everything. She would not marry William Pemberton. She would not become another ornament in her father's business empire. Somehow, some way, she would find a path to freedom. What dangerous choice will Victoria make to escape her golden prison? Continue reading to discover how one decision will lead her into the arms of the most dangerous man in New York. 3 nights later, Victoria did something she had never done before. She snuck out of the family penthouse, dressed in a simple black dress that she had borrowed from her lady's maid, with her distinctive blonde hair hidden beneath a dark cloche hat. She made her way through the shadowy streets of Manhattan. Her destination was the Crimson Room, a speak-easy hidden beneath a seemingly respectable bookstore in Greenwich Village. Victoria had overheard her younger cousin, Margaret, whispering about the place with her friends, describing it as a world where society's rules didn't apply, where jazz music filled the air with rebellion, and where people could be whoever they chose to be. The entrance was exactly as Margaret had described, a narrow alley beside the bookstore, a red door with no sign, and a small slat that opened when she knocked 3 times. A pair of suspicious eyes examined her before the door swung open, revealing a staircase that descended into a world Victoria had only imagined. The Crimson Room was everything her sheltered life was not. The air was thick with cigarette smoke and the intoxicating rhythm of jazz music. Couples danced with an abandon that would have scandalized her mother's social circle, and the laughter that filled the room carried a freedom Victoria had never experienced. She found a small table in a dimly lit corner and ordered a gin Ricky, marveling at the simple act of making her own choice about what to drink. For the first time in her life, she was anonymous, just another young woman seeking escape in the underground world of Prohibition-era New York. It was then that she saw him. He stood at the bar with the casual confidence of a man who owned whatever room he entered. Tall and lean, with dark hair that caught the amber light and eyes that seemed to see everything while revealing nothing. He wore a well-tailored suit that suggested money, but there was something dangerous in the way he carried himself, a predatory grace that set him apart from the soft, privileged men of her social circle. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and Victoria felt something she had never experienced before, a cult of pure electric attraction that seemed to bypass her rational mind entirely. He smiled, a slow, knowing expression that suggested he was accustomed to having this effect on women, and began making his way toward her table. "You don't belong here," he said, when he reached her, his voice carrying a slight accent she couldn't quite place. It wasn't a question but a statement of fact, delivered with amusement rather than judgment. "Neither do you," Victoria replied, surprised by her own boldness. He laughed, a rich sound that seemed to vibrate through her chest. "Fair enough. I'm Daniel Torrino, and you are far too beautiful to be sitting alone in a place like this." "Victoria," she said, then immediately regretted giving her real name. But something about this man made her want to be honest, even when honesty was dangerous. "Victoria," he repeated, as if testing the way her name felt on his tongue. "Would you like to dance, Victoria?" She should have said no. Everything about him screamed endure, from the way other patterns gave him a wide berth, to the subtle bulge beneath his jacket that suggested he was armed. But Victoria had spent her entire life saying no to everything she wanted, and yes to everything she didn't. "Yes," she said, taking his offered hand. The moment they touched, Victoria felt as if she had been struck by lightning. Daniel led her to the small dance floor, where he pulled her into his arms with a possessiveness that should have alarmed her but instead sent heat racing through her veins. They moved together as if they had been dancing for years, her body responding to his lead with an instinct she didn't know she possessed. The music seemed to fade into the background as they swayed together, the rest of the world disappearing, until there was nothing but the warmth of his hands and the intoxicating scent of his cologne. "What do you do, Daniel?" she asked, though part of her didn't want to know the answer. "Is it mild and enigmatic? I solve problems for people who can afford my services." It was a deliberately vague answer, but the way he said it sent a chill down Victoria's spine. She should have walked away then, should have returned to her safe, predictable world. Instead, she found herself leaning closer. "What kind of problems?" "The kind that require permanent solutions," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Victoria's rational mind screamed warnings, but her body betrayed her, pressing closer to this dangerous stranger who made her feel more alive than she had ever felt before. When the song ended, Daniel didn't release her. Instead, he leaned down until his lips were nearly touching her ear. "I'd like to see you again, Victoria. Tomorrow night. There's a place I want to show you." She should have said no, should have run back to her gilded cage and accepted her fate as William Pemberton's wife. Instead, she heard herself whisper, Yes, Victoria's host agreed to a second meeting with the mysterious Daniel Torrino. What dark secrets will she uncover about the man who has awakened desires she never knew existed? The danger is only beginning. The next evening, Victoria told her parents she was attending a charity function with Margaret, a lie that came surprisingly easily. She met Daniel at a small Italian restaurant in Italy, far from the glittering world of Manhattan's elite. The restaurant was intimate and dimly lit, with checkered tablecloths and the aroma of garlic and wine filling the air. Daniel was waiting for her at a corner table, looking devastatingly handsome in a charcoal suit that emphasized his dark good looks. "You came," he said, rising to pull out her chair with old-world gallantry. "Did you think I wouldn't? I thought you might come to your senses," he replied with that enigmatic smile that made her pulse quicken. Over dinner, Victoria found herself sharing things she had never told anyone. Her dreams of traveling the world, her love of literature, her frustration with the constraints of her privileged life. Daniel listened with an intensity that made her feel as if she were the only person in the world. "You're wasted on that world," he said, when she finished describing her father's plans for her marriage. "You have fire in you, Victoria. Don't let them extinguish it." "Easy for you to say," she replied with a bitter laugh. "You don't understand what it's like to be trapped by expectations, by duty, don't I?" Daniel's expression grew serious. "I grew up in the tenements of the Lower East Side. My father worked himself to death in a factory owned by men like your father, men who saw him as nothing more than a machine to be used until it broke down." Victoria felt a stab of guilt, but Daniel continued before she could speak. "I clawed my way out of that world, Victoria. He made choices that went pretty, did things that would horrify your delicate sensibilities. But I'm free now. I answer to no one but myself." "What kind of choices?" she asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Daniel stood there for a long moment, as if weighing how much truth she could handle. "I work for people who operate outside the law. When someone becomes a problem that can't be solved through legal means, they call me." The implication hung in the air between them like a loaded gun. Victoria should have been horrified, should have run screaming from the restaurant. Instead, she found herself leaning forward, fascinated by this glimpse into a world she had never imagined. "You're a killer," she said, the words barely above a whisper. "I'm a businessman," Daniel corrected. "Death is simply my product." The casual way he said it sent a thrill of terror and excitement through Victoria's body. She was sitting across from a man who took lives for money, and instead of being repulsed, she felt more attracted to him than ever. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because I want you to know exactly what you're getting involved with," Daniel replied. "I won't lie to you, Victoria. I won't pretend to be something I'm not. If you walk away now, I'll understand. But if you stay..." He didn't finish the sentence, but the promise in his dark eyes made Victoria's breath catch. She thought of William Pemberton, with his soft hands and softer mind, of the life of quiet desperation that awaited her as his wife. Then she looked at Daniel, dangerous, honest, alive in a way that made everything else seem like shadows. "I'm not walking away," she said. Daniel's smile was predatory and triumphant. "Good, because I have something to show you." He led her through the winding streets of Little Italy to a warehouse district that seemed abandoned in darkness. Victoria's heart pounded as they approached a nondescript building, but she trusted Daniel with a faith that defied logic. Inside, the warehouse had been converted into something that took Victoria's breath away. It was Daniel's private sanctuary, a luxurious apartment hidden in the heart of the industrial district. Rich fabrics and expensive furniture created an oasis of comfort, while the walls were lined with books that spoke of an educated mind behind the killer's facade. "This is where I come when I need to think," Daniel said, watching her explore the space. "No one else has ever been here." The significance of that statement wasn't lost on Victoria. In bringing her here, Daniel was sharing something precious, a glimpse of the man behind the dangerous reputation. It's beautiful, she said, running her fingers along the spine of a leather-bound volume of Shakespeare. Suario, Daniel said, moving to stand behind her. More beautiful than anything in this room. Victoria turned to face him, and the hunger in his eyes made her knees weak. When he reached up to cup her face in his hands, she didn't pull away. When he lowered his head to kiss her, she rose to meet him. The kiss was everything her sheltered life had never prepared her for. Passionate, demanding, and utterly consuming. Victoria felt as if she were drowning in sensation, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her as Daniel's hands tangled in her hair and pulled her closer. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Victoria stared up into Daniel's dark eyes and saw her own desire reflected there, magnified and intensified, until it threatened to consume them both. "Stay with me tonight," Daniel whispered against her lips. Victoria knew that crossing this line would change everything. There would be no going back to her old life, no pretending that she was still the innocent heiress her parents believed her to be. But as she looked into Daniel's eyes, she realized she didn't want to go back. "Yes," she breathed, and sealed her fate with a single word. Victoria who's made a choice that will shatter her world forever. But as she surrenders to passion in the arms of a killer, she has no idea that deadly forces are already moving against them both. Victoria woke in Daniel's arms as dawn painted the warehouse windows gold. She had never spent a night away from her family's penthouse, and the freedom of it was intoxicating. Daniel's body was warm against hers, his breathing steady and peaceful in sleep. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine a different life. One where she could wake up like this every morning, where love mattered more than duty or family expectations. But reality intruded as she remembered her father's ultimatum about William Pember. "You're thinking too loud," Daniel murmured against her hair, his voice rough with sleep. "I have to go home," Victoria said reluctantly. "They'll notice if I'm not there for breakfast." Daniel's arms tightened around her. "Stay. Let them notice. You don't understand. Your father doesn't own you, Victoria." Daniel's voice carried an edge of steel. "You're not property to be traded for business advantages." Victoria turned in his arms to face him, struck by the intensity in his dark eyes. "It's not that simple. There are expectations, responsibilities, there are choices." Daniel interrupted. "You can choose to live your life for yourself, or you can choose to be a pawn in someone else's game." Before Victoria could respond, the sound of breaking glass shattered the morning quiet. Daniel was on his feet instantly, a gun appearing in his hand with practiced speed. He motioned for Victoria to stay low as he moved toward the window. "Get dressed," he said quietly, his entire demeanor transformed from lover to predator. "We need to leave now." Victoria's hands shook as she pulled on her clothes, terror and adrenaline coursing through her veins. "What's happening? Someone found us," Daniel replied, checking his weapon with grim efficiency. "Someone who doesn't want us to leave here alive." The sound of footsteps on the warehouse stairs confirmed Daniel's fears. He grabbed Victoria's hand and led her toward a hidden door she hadn't noticed the night before. "There's a fire escape on the other side," he explained as they moved through the narrow passage. "Stay behind me and do exactly what I say." They emerged onto a metal platform, overlooking the alley behind the warehouse. Victoria could hear voices inside the building now, rough and threatening. Daniel helped her down the fire escape, his movements quick and sure despite the danger. They had almost reached the ground when the first shot rang out. The bullet sparked off the metal railing inches from Victoria's head, and she screamed despite herself. "Run!" Daniel shouted, pushing her toward the mouth of the alley. More shots followed as they sprinted through the maze of narrow streets. Daniel seemed to know every turn, every shortcut, leading her through the urban labyrinth with the confidence of a man who had fled for his life before. They finally stopped in the doorway of an abandoned building, both breathing hard. Victoria's elegant dress was torn and dirty, her carefully styled hair disheveled, but she had never felt more alive. Who were they? She gasped. Daniel's expression was grim. Competition. Someone doesn't like that. I'm operating in their territories. This is because of your work, Victoria said, the reality of Daniel's dangerous life hitting her with full force. This is my life, Victoria, Daniel replied. Violence, danger, and uncertainty. It's what I am. If you stay with me, it's what you'll become too. Victoria stared at him, seeing not just the man she had fallen in love with, but the killer he truly was. The romantic fantasy she had constructed around their relationship crumbled as she faced the brutal reality of what loving Daniel Torino would cost her. I need to think, she said finally. Daniel nodded, though she could see the disappointment in his eyes. I'll take you home. The ride back to the Upper East Side was silent, both of them lost in their own thoughts. When they reached the corner near her building, Daniel caught her hand before she could leave the car. Victoria, he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. I love you. I know that doesn't change what I am or what my life entails, but I needed you to know. The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. In her world, love was a luxury, a pleasant addition to marriages built on practical considerations. But the raw and honesty in Daniel's voice spoke of something deeper, more dangerous than anything she had ever experienced. I love you too, she whispered, the admission torn from her heart. Daniel's smile was sad and beautiful. Then you know why this is so hard. Victoria kissed him then, pouring all her confusion and desire and terror into the contact. When they broke apart, tears were streaming down her face. Give me time, she said. Time is something I might not have much of, Daniel replied. But I'll wait as long as I can. Victoria watched his car disappear into the morning traffic, then made her way up to the penthouse. She slipped inside through the service entrance, hoping to reach her room undetected, but her mother was waiting in the hallway. Victoria. Eleanor's voice was sharp with worry and anger. Where have you been? Your father has been looking for you all morning. I stayed at Margaret's, Victoria lied, praying her mother wouldn't notice her disheveled appearance. Eleanor's eyes narrowed as she took in Victoria's torn dress and wild hair. You look like you've been through a war zone. What really happened? Before Victoria could answer, her father's voice boomed from his study. Victoria, in here, now. Victoria's heart sank as she realized her time for decision-making had just run out. Victoria's secret is about to be exposed, and her father's fury will force her to make an impossible choice. Will she choose duty and safety, or will she risk everything for a love that could destroy them both? Charles Ashford stood behind his massive mahogany desk, like a judge preparing to deliver a death sentence. His steel gray eyes were cold with fury, and Victoria knew immediately that her carefully constructed lie had already crumbled. Sit down, he commanded, his voice carrying the authority that had built an empire. Victoria remained standing, drawing on reserves of courage she hadn't known she possessed. I prefer to stand. You prefer? Charles's voice rose dangerously. You prefer? Let me tell you what I prefer, Victoria. I prefer daughters who don't lie to their parents. I prefer daughters who don't sneak out in the middle of the night to consort with criminals. Victoria's blood turned to ice. I don't know what you're talking about. Charles opened a manila folder on his desk and withdrew a series of photographs, even from across the room. Victoria could see they showed her and Daniel at the restaurant, walking through Little Italy, entering the warehouse together. I had you followed, Charles said with cold satisfaction. Did you really think I wouldn't notice when my daughter started behaving like a common streetwalker? The words hit Victoria like a slap, but she refused to flinch. How dare you? How dare I? Charles's voice exploded through the room. How dare you? Did you have any idea who Daniel Torino is, what he does for a living? I know exactly who he is, Victoria said, lifting her chin defiantly. He's a killer, Victoria. A murderer who sells death to the highest bid is suspected in at least a dozen murders, though the police can never prove anything because his victims have a tendency to disappear completely. Each word was designed to wound, but Victoria stood her ground. I don't care. Charles stared at her as if she had lost her mind. You don't care, Victoria. This man is a cancer on society. Is everything our family stands against, violence, lawlessness, moral corruption. Is honest, Victoria sought back, which is more than I can say for most of the men in your social circle. Honest? Charles laughed bitterly. He kills people for money, Victoria. What's honest about that? At least he doesn't pretend to be something he's not, Victoria replied. At least he doesn't hide behind respectability while crushing the lives of working people. The accusation hung in the air between them like a loaded weapon. Charles' face turned red with rage, and for a moment Victoria thought he might strike her. You ungrateful little fool, he said finally. Everything I've built, everything I've sacrificed has been for this family. For you. No, Victoria said quietly. It's been for you. For your ego, your legacy, your empire. I'm just another asset to be traded when the price is right. Eleanor, who had been standing silently by the door, finally spoke. Victoria, darling, you're upset. You're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking more clearly than I ever have, Victoria interrupted. For the first time in my life, I know what I want. Charles slammed his hand down on the desk with enough force to rattle the crystal paperweights. What you want is irrelevant. You are my daughter, and you will do as I say. You will marry William Pemberton, and you will never see Daniel Torino again. And if I refuse, Charles' smile was as cold as winter steel. Then you will be cut off completely. No money, no family, no support of any kind. You'll be thrown out of this house with nothing but the clothes on your back. The threat should have terrified Victoria, but instead she felt a strange sense of liberation. The golden cage her father had built around her was finally revealed for what it truly was. A prison. Furthermore, Charles continued, I will use every resource at my disposal to ensure that Daniel Torino is arrested and prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. I have connections in the police department, the district attorney's office, even the federal government. One word from me, and your lover will spend the rest of his life in prison. Now Victoria felt real fear, not for herself, but for Daniel. Her father's influence was vast, and his resources unlimited. If he decided to destroy Daniel, he had the power to do it. You have 24 hours to decide, Charles said with finality. Marry William Pemberton, and live the life you were born to live, or lose everything, including the man you think you love. Victoria stared at her father, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time in her life. Behind the facade of respectability and success was a man who would destroy anyone who threatened his control, even his own daughter. I need time to think, she said finally. You have until tomorrow evening, Charles replied. The Pembertons are expecting an answer. Victoria turned and walked from the room with as much dignity as she could muster. But once she reached the safety of her bedroom, she collapsed onto her bed, and she was trapped between two impossible choices: abandon the man she loved to save him from her father's wrath, or fight for their love and watch Daniel be destroyed in the process. As night fell over Manhattan, Victoria sat by her window and stared out at the city lights, searching for an answer that seemed as distant as the stars themselves. With less than 24 hours to choose between love and duty, Victoria must find a way to save both Daniel and herself. But in a world where money is power and power is everything, can love truly conquer all? The explosive conclusion awaits, the point of no return. Victoria spent the night pacing her room like a caged animal, her mind racing through possibilities and scenarios, each more desperate than the last. By dawn, she had made her decision, one that would either save them both or destroy them completely. She waited until her parents left for their respective social obligations before slipping out of the penthouse. The morning air was crisp with the promise of autumn, and Manhattan bustled with its usual energy, oblivious to the drama playing out in the Ashford family. Victoria made her way to a small cafe in Greenwich Village, where she had arranged to meet Daniel. He was already there when she arrived, sitting in a cornered booth, with his back to the wall, a habit, she realized, born of a life where danger could come from any direction. "You look like you haven't slept," Daniel said, as she slid into the seat across from him. "I haven't," Victoria replied. "Daniel, we need to talk." She told him everything, her father's ultimatum, the photographs, the threats against Daniel's freedom. As she spoke, she watched his expression grow darker and more dangerous. "So the old man wants to play hardball," Daniel said when she finished. "Let him try." "You don't understand," Victoria said urgently. "My father has connections everywhere. He can make good on his threats." Daniel's smile was cold and predatory. "Your father isn't the only one with connections, Victoria. I've survived this long because I know how to handle men like Charles Ashford." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that if your father wants a war, he can have one, but he won't like how it ends." Victoria felt a chill of fear at the implication in Daniel's words. "You can't hurt my father." "Why not?" Daniel's voice was flat and emotionless. "He's threatening to destroy both of us. In my world, that kind of threat has consequences." "Because he's my father," Victoria said desperately. "Because despite everything, I love him." Daniel studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, no violence against your family. But that doesn't mean I'm going to roll over and let him crush us. Then what do you suggest?" Daniel leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "We disappear. Tonight. We have money hidden away. Contacts in other cities. We can start over somewhere your father's influence can't reach us." The proposal hung between them like a bridge over an abyss. Victoria knew that crossing it would mean abandoning everything she had ever known. Her family, her fortune, her identity as an Ashford. "What about your work?" she asked. "There are people who need my services in every city," Daniel replied. "I can build a new operation anywhere." Victoria closed her eyes, trying to imagine a life on the run with a man whose profession was death. It should have terrified her, but instead she felt a thrill of excitement at the thought of finally being free. Where would we go? Chicago first, then maybe California. I have friends on the West Coast who owe me favors. Victoria opened her eyes and looked into Daniel's face, seeing the hope and determination there. "And you'd give up everything here for me?" "Victoria," Daniel said softly, "you are everything. Without you, the rest is just business." The simple honesty of his words broke through the last of Victoria's resistance. She reached across the table and took his hand, feeling the callous that spoke of a life far removed from her sheltered existence. "When do we leave?" Daniel's smile was brilliant and dangerous. "Tonight, pack light, only what you can carry in a single suitcase. Meet me at Grand Central Station at midnight." "Platform 7. Victoria nodded, her heart pounding with fear and excitement. "What about my father's threats?" "Let me worry about your father," Daniel said. "By the time he realizes what's happened, we'll be long gone." They parted with a kiss that tasted of desperation and promise, and Victoria returned to the penthouse to prepare for the most important night of her life. As evening approached, Victoria carefully selected the few possessions she couldn't bear to leave behind: her mother's pearl necklace, a first-edition copy of Jane Eyre, and a photograph of herself as a child. Everything else, the designer gowns, the expensive jewelry, the symbols of her privileged life, would remain behind like shed skin. At 11:30, Victoria wrote a letter to her parents, explaining her decision and begging them to understand. She left it on her pillow, knowing that by the time they found it, she would be beyond their reach. The taxi ride to Grand Central Station felt like a journey through a dream. Victoria watched the familiar streets of Manhattan slide past the window, knowing she might never see them again. Instead of sadness, she felt a growing sense of liberation. Grand Central was bustling with late-night travelers, and Victoria made her way through the crowds toward Platform City. Her heart raced as she searched for Daniel among the sea of faces, her single suitcase clutched tightly in her hand. She found him waiting by the train, looking devastatingly handsome in a dark overcoat. When he saw her, his face lit up with a smile that made her forget every doubt she had ever harbored. "You came," he said, pulling her into his arms. "Did you think I wouldn't?" "I hoped you would," Daniel replied. "But I know what you're giving up for me." Victoria looked into his eyes and saw her future there, uncertain, dangerous, but gloriously free. "I'm not giving up anything that matters." The train whistle blew, and Daniel took her hand. "Ready?" Victoria thought of her father's ultimatum, of William Pemberton's soft hands and softer mind, of the life of quiet desperation that awaited her in the golden cage of Manhattan society. Then she looked at Daniel and saw passion, honesty, and a love worth any sacrifice. "I'm ready," she said, and stepped onto the train that would carry her toward an uncertain but exhilarating future. As the train pulled away from the station, Victoria pressed her face to the window and watched New York City disappear into the darkness. She was no longer Victoria Ashford, heiress to a steel fortune. She was simply Victoria, a woman in love with a dangerous man, ready to face whatever consequences her choice might bring. 6 months later, Victoria stood on the balcony of a modest apartment overlooking Lake Michigan, watching the sun set over Chicago's skyline. The woman who gazed out at the water bore little resemblance to the sheltered Heiress, who had fled New York in the dead of night. Her platinum hair had been cut into a fashionable bob and dyed a rich auburn. Her expensive gowns had been replaced by simple but elegant dresses that she had learned to buy with her own money earned working as a secretary in a downtown law firm. The soft hands that had never known work were now capable and strong. But the most dramatic change was in her eyes, where once there had been the restless dissatisfaction of a caged bird. Now there was the quiet confidence of a woman who had chosen her own path and accepted the consequences. "You're thinking too loud again," Daniel said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Victoria leaned back against his chest, marveling at how natural the gesture had become. "I was thinking about my parents, wondering if they've forgiven me." Daniel's arms tightened around her. "Do you regret leaving?" Victoria considered the question seriously. Their life in Chicago had not been easy. Daniel's work, though he had tried to shield her from the worst of it, remained dangerous and morally ambiguous. They had lived under assumed names, always looking over their shoulders, never quite able to relax completely. But they had also discovered something neither had expected, the possibility of redemption. "No," Victoria said finally. "I don't regret it, but I do miss them sometimes." Daniel turned her in his arms, his dark eyes serious. "Victoria, there's something I need to tell you." The gravity in his voice made her stomach clench with sudden fear. "What is it?" "I've been offered a job, a legitimate job. The man I've been working for here is going straight, starting a security company. He wants me to head up his personal protection division." Victoria stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "You mean no more killing?" Daniel said quietly. "No more looking over our shoulders. A chance to build something real, something clean." Tears sprang to Victoria's eyes. "Daniel, that's wonderful. But why do you look so worried?" Daniel's expression grew troubled. "Because taking this job means staying in one place, building a reputation, becoming visible. If your father is still looking for us, he'll find us," Victoria finished. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the decision hanging between them. Victoria thought of the life they could build together, marriage, children, a future free from the shadows of Daniel's past. But she also thought of her father's resources and his capacity for vengeance. There's something else, Daniel said. I've been in contact with a private investigator in New York. He's been keeping tabs on your family. Victoria's heart leaped. And? Your father had a heart attack 3 months ago. He's alive, but he stepped back from active management of the company. Your mother has been struggling. The news hit Victoria like a physical blow. Despite everything that had happened between them, the thought of her father's illness and her mother's pain filled her with guilt and longing. I have to go back, she said suddenly. Daniel's face went pale. Victoria, that's suicide. The moment you set foot in New York, is my father, Victoria interrupted. Whatever else he is, whatever he's done, he's still my father. And my mother needs me. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working as he struggled with emotions. Victoria could only guess finally, he nodded. Then, we go back together. Daniel, no. It's too dangerous for you. Where you go, I go, Daniel said firmly. We're in this together, remember? Victoria felt a surge of love so powerful it nearly brought her to her knees. What about the job offer? Daniel's smile was sad but determined. Some things are more important than safety. 2 days later, they boarded a train bound for New York. Victoria watched the familiar landscape roll past the window, her emotions a tangle of fear, anticipation, and hope. They arrived at Grand Central Station on a gray October morning, the same platform where their journey had begun 6 months earlier. Victoria half expected to see police waiting for them, but the platform was filled with nothing more threatening than ordinary travelers. Daniel had arranged for them to stay at a small hotel in Greenwich Village, far from the Upper East Side, and her family's sphere of influence. But Victoria knew that their presence in the city wouldn't remain secret for long. She was right. They had been in New York for less than 24 hours when a knock came at their hotel room door. Victoria's heart hammered as Daniel approached the door cautiously, his hand moving instinctively toward the gun concealed beneath his jacket. "Who is it?" he called. "Margaret Ashford." "Come in," the reply. "Victoria's cousin." Victoria gasped and rushed to the door. Margaret stood in the hallway, looking older and more serious than Victoria remembered. Her cousin's eyes filled with tears when she saw Victoria. "My God," Margaret whispered, "you're really here." They embraced fiercely, and Victoria felt a piece of her heart that had been frozen for 6 months finally begin to thaw. "How did you find us?" Victoria asked. "I've been watching the train stations, the hotels," Margaret replied. "I knew you'd come back eventually, especially after what?" Margaret's expression grew grave. "Victoria, your father is dying. The doctors say he has weeks, maybe days. He's been asking for you." Victoria felt the world tilt around her. "I have to see him. That's why I'm here," Margaret said. "But Victoria, you need to know, he's not the same man you left. The heart attack changed him. He's softer somehow, more human." Daniel stepped forward, his expression wary. This could be a trap. Margaret looked at him with curiosity rather than fear. "You must be Daniel. I've heard so much about you." "Nothing good, I'm sure," Daniel replied dryly. "Actually," Margaret said with a slight smile, "Victoria's letters made you sound quite heroic. A man willing to give up everything for love." Victoria stared at her cousin in shock. "You've been getting my letter?" "Every one," Margaret confirmed. "I've been the go-between, keeping your mother informed about your welfare without your father's knowledge." The revelation that her mother had known she was safe all along brought fresh tears to Victoria's eyes. "How is she?" "Heartbroken," Margaret said honestly, "but hopeful. She never stopped believing you'd come home." Victoria looked at Daniel, seeing her own conflict reflected in his dark eyes. Going to see her father meant exposing themselves to danger, but the alternative, letting him die without reconciliation, was unthinkable. "We'll go," Victoria said finally, "but we go together." Margaret nodded. "I'll arrange it. But Victoria, whatever happens, know that some of us never stopped loving you. As her cousin left to make her arrangements, Victoria turned to Daniel and saw the man she had fallen in love with. Dangerous, honest, and willing to risk everything for her happiness. "Are you sure about this?" he asked. Victoria thought of her father lying in his bed, perhaps thinking of the daughter he had driven away in his pride and anger. She thought of her mother, keeping Vicky beside him, carrying the weight of a family torn apart by stubbornness and fear. "I'm sure," she said. "Whatever happens, we face it together." Daniel smiled and pulled her into his arms. "Together," he agreed. Outside their window, New York City hummed with its eternal energy, indifferent to the human dramas playing out in its shadows. But for Victoria and Daniel, the city held a promise of redemption, a chance to heal old wounds and build something new from the ashes of the past. The heiress who had fallen in love with a killer was about to discover that sometimes love really could conquer all. 1 year later, Victoria Torino, for she had taken Daniel's name in a small ceremony in Chicago, stood in the garden of the Ashford family estate, watching her husband play with their infant daughter. The reconciliation with her family had not been easy. Her father's deathbed forgiveness had come with tears and regrets on both sides, but it had come. Her mother had welcomed Daniel with surprising grace, perhaps recognizing in him the strength and passion that had always been missing from Victoria's previous suitors. Daniel's transformation from killer to protector had been complete. His security company was thriving, staffed largely by men like himself, dangerous men seeking redemption through legitimate work. As Victoria watched her husband lift their daughter into the air, drawing delighted giggles from the child, she marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. The golden cage of her youth had been replaced by something far more precious, a life built on choice, love, and the courage to face whatever consequences those choices might bring. The heiress and the killer had found their happy ending, not in spite of their dangerous love, but because of it.